Body horror's entire purpose is to make you cringe, make you feel sick, or turn your stomach inside out. Filmmakers want to come up with ways to make you uncomfortable to the max, and that usually involves doing unthinkable things to corpses and or living unfortunates. If they manage to get you to cover your eyes and exclaim, "Oh, Jesus Christ, what the fuck?" then they can confidently say they've done their job. So 8 intense horror movie scenes you couldn't watch. Number 8. 7. The Living Corpse. The 1995 psychological horror crime thriller Seven was David Fincher's sophomore directorial endeavour. Coming off the back of the lukewarm reception to Alien 3, Fincher managed to redeem himself with this well-crafted but disturbing tale. The story follows Detective David Mills and his soon-to-retire partner, Detective Lieutenant William Somerset, following along as they investigate a string of murders committed by a man with a biblical sense of retribution. Each victim the two encounter has been subjected to some kind of horrific ordeal, all of which represent one of the deadly sins. They encounter an obese man forced to eat himself to death, representing gluttony, and a lawyer forced to cut away a pound of his own flesh, representing greed, and so on. But one of the most tense and disturbing scenes involves the two detectives investigating the crime scene for sloth. They enter a run-down building and find a known sex offender strapped to a bed in a state of physical decay. He looks like at this point he's just skin and bones. He probably reeks. That is just a dead guy on a bed. Or that's what they think. But it turns out that rotting corpse is actually the body of a severely emaciated but alive man, kept on this mortal plane only by the bare minimum sustenance. Watching him move around, looking at the bones under his skin, ugh, no part of that is enjoyable. 7. Misery. The Hobbling. After the release of this particular Stephen King adaptation, Kathy Bates was seen by the world in a whole new light. You see, Misery isn't your average cliched horror. There's no teens running around, there's no jump scares. Instead, it's made far more sinister than all that by Kathy Bates' incredibly unsettling performance. The aptly named Misery tells the story of an over-obsessed fan, Annie Wilkes, who happens to find her favourite writer, Paul Sheldon, after he's been in a car accident. She nurses him back to health, but upon hearing the outcome of his latest manuscript, she's displeased with the ending. She forces Sheldon to rewrite his story until she's satisfied with it, and he complies, but that's only until he can devise an escape plan, which unfortunately for him, fails. After a disturbing monologue which hears Annie explain how she must perform an operation on Paul for his own good, she breaks his ankles in a truly brutal fashion. She places a block of wood between his legs and proceeds to swing a sledgehammer. And yeah, you do the math, you know what comes next. If you thought the first blow was hard to watch, the second was even worse after watching her nonchalantly wander over to do it all over again. Absolute psycho behaviour. 6. Hostel. The ball gag vomit. There are plenty of disturbing and disgusting moments in Hostel, but one you may not think of is the instance in which we're forced to confront one of the most disgusting bodily fluids, vomit. After the first Saw movie came out in 2004, gore horror became all the rage, and Eli Roth saw all this popularity and went, hey yeah, I'd like me a piece of that. Hostel took what Saw had established and turned it up to 11. Whilst Saw revolved around the sick games of Jigsaw, punishing people he deemed had done wrong, Hostel told the story of millionaire sickos who paid money to torture backpackers just because they wanted to. Although there were gorier scenes than this, including one where a victim has his Achilles tendon severed, one of the most disturbing involved Paxton being tormented with a threat of violence. In this scene, he watches a man have his fingers cut off, but the cherry on top of that torture cake is seeing just how much the guy doing the cutting is enjoying it. The sadistic pleasure that the torturer seemed to get from watching his victim squirm caused Paxton to uncontrollably vomit through his ball gag, a vision that is just undescribably grim. The sheer terror and helplessness felt by this character is enough to make anyone retch. 5. Dog Soldiers. Private Terry's looking tasty. Neil Marshall has come a long way since his directorial debut in the early 2000s. He's well known for directing big-budget operations like Game of Thrones and the Hellboy reboot, but this guy cut his teeth on low-budget, gory horror flicks. This grainy, dim-lit horror involves a group of British squaddies on a training exercise in the remote Scottish Highlands, who, in their words, get waylaid by a bunch of huge fucking howling things. The 6-man squad are forced to hotfoot it through the remote landscape as an unseen foe pursues them. During one scene, they devise a plan to hotwire an old jeep, and whilst the other survivors cause a distraction, the squad's Geordie member makes a desperate dash for the barn housing the car. Luckily for him, he manages to successfully hotwire it, but as the lights flicker on, the audience is faced with the grisly scene of Private Terry, previously thought to be dead, being slowly eaten alive by one of the werewolves. The combination of shock and gore can take you out on that one. 4. Apostle, 1900s brain surgery. Having a rusty drill bit slowly inserted into the top of one's cranium is surely low on one's bucket list, and watching it happen to someone else cannot be that much higher. Apostle follows Thomas Richardson, a former missionary who travels to a secluded Welsh island in the hope of rescuing his sister from the clutches of a cult. His mission brings him into conflict with a whole load of fanatical devotees who, unfortunately for him, have a penchant for human sacrifice. Their aim with their kills is to purify the land and make it fertile, but instead of just investing in some manure, they take it several steps further. During one particularly horrific purification scene, a member of the cult is strapped to a table for all to see and has a drill bit slowly fed into his brain. Although we're spared the ordeal of witnessing the actual insertion, the twitching legs of the victim and the cries of horror from the onlooking crowd are enough to make the event unbearable. 3. Freaky, the opening rampage. Now, just because a horror is also a comedy doesn't mean that it can't confront you with some pretty gruesome imagery, and that was proven in the opening sequence of Freaky. The film's central killer, the Blissfield Butcher, hunts down a group of teenagers in a mansion and kills them each brutally. In a way, each kill is slightly comedic, but they're all still nonetheless cringe-inducing in nature. It may have been partially my own fault for going in expecting the film to be relatively bloodless, more erring on the side of black comedy than true slasher gore, and this meant that when we see the Butcher's first victim get a wine bottle viciously shoved down his throat and then smashed, I couldn't help but actually gag a bit. Next up, a girl gets her head smashed in with a toilet seat, immediately followed by a man being stabbed through the throat with the jagged ends of a broken tennis racket. And then, of course, to finish it all up, we have a girl get impaled through the spine on a metal spike. The whole scene is just one horrid death after another. It's so relentless that it's actually a little hard to endure. 2. Suspiria 2018, the dance scene. Now, this isn't a hard watch just because of Dakota Johnson's unconvincing display of modern dance, though that is an element, but instead because completely out of the blue you're forced to watch a human body break and contort in ways that it never should. In one room, we see Johnson as dancer Susie, throwing her best shapes to impress the matrons. She moves sharply and with purpose, driving her body forward and back, thrusting her limbs around with a certain dramatic flair. Unbeknownst to her, however, her every move is absolutely battering a lass in the next studio over. Through the walls, Susie's dance is causing havoc. Principal dancer Olga has her body ravaged by an unseen power, bending and snapping her into wholly unnatural positions. A combination of the climactic music, the sharp cuts between the girls, and the overt body horror at play makes this scene super hard to watch. 1. Bone Tomahawk, a human wishbone. It's fair to say that genre crossovers are hard to pull off sometimes, and that makes it even more impressive what Bone Tomahawk managed to achieve. First a western and then a disgusting, all kinds of fucked up horror, the film offers up one particular scene that will have you crossing your legs and covering your eyes. First position, I'll admit, was a toss-up between this and another very similar scene from Terrifier. Bone Tomahawk, however, is the better film by far and so pips it to the post. But on that topic, have you ever wondered what it feels like to be cut in half from the groin upwards? No? Well, neither have I, and I never want to find out. In this scene, we witness the cave-dwelling killers brutally murder a kidnapped local. First, they strip him before violently scalping him, and going as far as to stuff his own bloody hair back in his mouth. To add injury to injury, they then decide to finish the job by turning him upside down and bisecting him, hacking down through his body before tearing him apart and snapping him like a wishbone. If you could watch all that without covering your eyes and peeking through your fingers, then you definitely have a stronger stomach than most. And on that horrible, disgusting note, we've reached the end of this list of 8